In 22, something happened that no one alive today had ever seen before. In a single weekend, the United States and Europe froze more than $300 billion of another nation's central bank reserves, not private assets, not oligarch money, a sovereign nation's official reserves. And it didn't stop there. They also moved to disconnect major Russian banks from SWIFT, the global messaging network that signals over $5 trillion of payments every single day. It was the biggest financial attack in modern history, and it shocked governments around the world far more than it shocked Russia. Because what the West did in February 2022 wasn't just a sanction, it was a revelation that the financial system the world has trusted for 80 years could be turned off like a light switch. But let's rewind for a moment. SWIFT is not a bank. It doesn't hold money. It doesn't move money. It moves messages, the secure instructions that allow banks to communicate across borders. Turn off the messaging, and the accounts still exist, but they become mute. And for a country that exports energy, metals, food, fertilizer, and industrial goods, being mute is like being blindfolded during a boxing match. For decades, SWIFT was considered neutral infrastructure, boring, technical, invisible, something countries didn't think much about because it just worked. But on that February weekend, the world discovered something they were never supposed to notice. SWIFT is not neutral. The dollar system is not neutral. The global financial plumbing that runs through New York and Brussels is not neutral. It's controlled. And the ones who control it are willing to use it as a weapon. Western politicians called the SWIFT cutoff the nuclear option. Analysts predicted Russia's total collapse. The ruble would crash to zero. ATMs would run dry. The banking system would implode, but that's not what happened. Russia absorbed the hit. The ruble rebounded. Oil and gas flows rerouted to Asia. Exports shifted from Europe to India and China. Payments moved from dollars to yuan, rupees, and dirhams. Russia did not disappear from the world economy. It simply changed lanes. And while Russia was adapting, the real shockwaves were happening somewhere else. In Riyadh, in Beijing, in New Delhi, in Brasilia, in Jakarta. Every finance minister and central banker on earth understood the new message. If the United States can freeze $300 billion of Russia's reserves, then no country's reserves are truly safe. Not Saudi Arabia's, not India's, not Brazil's, not Indonesia's, not even the reserves of long-standing U.S. partners. Your money is only yours as long as Washington agrees with your politics. And that realization travels fast. Within months, a global shift began. Quiet, cautious, but unmistakable. Countries started reducing their exposure to the dollar system. China cut its U.S. Treasury holdings. Saudi Arabia began accepting yuan for oil. India settled Russian oil trades in rupees. The UAE used dirhams. BRICS expanded. Central banks bought record amounts of gold, the highest in more than 50 years. New payment systems like China's CIPS, Russia's SPFS, and India's UPI saw explosive growth. And here's the quiet truth. This shift began not in Moscow, but in Washington. Because the moment the U.S. weaponized the financial system at full scale, it stopped being infrastructure and started being leverage. And no rational nation wants its entire economy dependent on someone else's leverage. To understand why this moment was so big, you have to see how the system worked before 2022. For nearly 8 decades, SWIFT and the dollar network were marketed as neutral, reliable, apolitical. Countries used dollars because they were stable. They held U.S. Treasuries because they were safe. They cleared payments through New York because it was efficient and trustworthy. That trust, more than military power, more than ideology, is what made the dollar the center of the world. But trust is fragile, and freezing $300 billion of sovereign reserves is the fastest way to break it. The West thought it was punishing Russia, but the rest of the world saw something else entirely. A warning that if you anger Washington, your money can disappear, that your banks can go silent, that your economy can be strangled without a single shot being fired. Once that idea enters a nation's mind, it never leaves. And that is why February 2022 will be remembered, not as the moment Russia was isolated, but as the moment the world realized it needed alternatives. Alternatives to SWIFT, alternatives to New York clearing, alternatives to the dollar. Because no country, no matter how friendly today, wants to wake up one morning and discover its national wealth has been turned into someone else's negotiating tool. That is the real beginning of this story, not the sanction, not the headline. The moment the world realized the financial system could be used against them. And once that trust is gone, history shows it never fully returns. When the world realized in 22 that reserves could be frozen and banks could be silenced, the reaction wasn't loud. It wasn't emotional, it was strategic. And it happened in 3 layers: the targets, the neutrals, and the giants quietly building a new financial architecture outside the dollar's reach. Russia, the immediate target, moved first, but what came next was far more important: the behavior of countries that were not sanctioned, not in conflict, and not anti-American. Because when the neutrals move, it signals a structural shift, not a political protest. And the shift began with the world's oldest hedge, gold. In 22 and 23, central banks purchased more gold than at any time in the last 55 years. Not retail buyers, not investors chasing price pumps. Central banks, the institutions responsible for national reserves. China increased its official gold holdings month after month. Russia accelerated its long-standing gold strategy. Turkey, India, Qatar, Uzbekistan, Singapore. Dozens of countries quietly converted parts of their reserves from paper to metal. And this wasn't random. Gold is the only reserve asset that no government can freeze, no sanctions can block, no SWIFT cutoff can disrupt. It doesn't rely on New York clearing or correspondent accounts. That's why the moment trust in the dollar system cracked, gold became the natural insurance policy. But gold was only the beginning. The second shift was even more critical: global treasury liquidation. China cut its U.S. Treasury holdings from $1.3 trillion a decade ago to roughly $770 billion. Japan reduced holdings. Saudi Arabia trimmed exposure. Even tiny nations began slowly diversifying. No panic, no announcements, just a steady drip, month after month, as countries adjusted their portfolios to reflect the new risk, political vulnerability inside the U.S.-controlled system. The third shift came from energy markets, the heart of dollar dominance. Since 1974, the world has operated under the petrodollar system, oil priced in dollars, sold for dollars, and reinvested back into U.S. Treasuries. That loop created the backbone of American financial power. But in 2023, something happened that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. Saudi Arabia accepted yuan for oil shipments to China. The UAE settled energy contracts in dirhams. India bought massive quantities of Russian crude in rupees, and Russia priced some of its Arctic oil in yuan. These were not symbolic gestures. They were early cracks in the petrodollar architecture. Slowly, the world began proving a dangerous idea. International trade can happen without the dollar. And once you prove something can be done, you never go back to pretending it can't. But the biggest change wasn't gold, treasuries, or oil. It was the rise of alternative payment systems. China's CIPS network processed over $27 trillion of transactions in 2023, doubling its volume in just 3 years. Russia's SPFS kept its domestic banking system alive after SWIFT cutoff, handling millions of messages daily. India's UPI, originally just a domestic payment tool, processed 12 billion transactions in a single month and began expanding cross-border. BRICS nations started linking their local systems. Regional blocs began experimenting with digital settlement rails not dependent on Washington or Brussels. What used to be a monopoly suddenly had competition. The dollar network wasn't collapsing. It was being duplicated, and duplication is the first step toward irrelevance. Meanwhile, the US and Europe believed they were tightening control. Instead, they were teaching the world how dangerous dependence can be. For decades, the dollar's dominance didn't come from fear, it came from trust. Trust that American institutions were stable, trust that US law was predictable, trust that reserves held in dollars were safe. But after 2022, the equation flipped. The question inside global finance ministries shifted from why diversify to why stay exposed. And once that psychological shift happens, behavior changes automatically. Countries don't need to hate the US to reduce their dollar exposure. They just need to protect themselves. And they are. The data shows it clearly. The dollar's share of global reserves fell from 71% in 1999 to 58% today. But what matters isn't the long decline, it's the speed. The drop in the last 5 years has been faster than the previous 15 combined. Trade invoicing in dollars fell from 73% in 22 to under 60% by 2024. CIPS, SPFS, and regional systems grew faster between 22 and 24 than in the previous decade. Gold demand from central banks hit levels not seen since the late 1960s. This is not theory. This is transition, not because countries hate America, but because America showed them something they were never supposed to see. The reserve currency of the world can be used as a weapon, and weapons create enemies. Infrastructure creates partners. The dollar used to be infrastructure. After 22, it became both. And that dual identity is impossible to sustain in the long run. So the world did what any rational actor would do. They reduced dependence. They created alternatives. They hedged. And in doing so, they weakened the very leverage the U.S. believed it was strengthening. Because here's the paradox Washington didn't anticipate. The more you weaponize a system, the less the world wants to rely on it. And the less the world relies on it, the less effective the weapon becomes. The swift cutoff didn't just isolate Russia. It isolated the dollar system from the perception of neutrality. And once neutrality is gone, decline becomes a matter of time, not ideology. Here's the part most people miss. Financial systems don't collapse when the enemy attacks them. They collapse when the world quietly stops believing in them. That's exactly where the dollar system now stands. Not collapsing, not dying tomorrow, but losing the one thing it needs more than anything else: unquestioned trust. Every empire's financial power ends the same way. Not with a dramatic explosion, but with a gradual shift in behavior, a change in how nations save, trade, and settle their accounts. A move from one center of gravity to another. That's the stage we're entering now. The United States didn't lose power because Russia fought back. It lost power because the world watched what happened in 22 and said, "We need a backup plan." That sentence is the beginning of every monetary transition in history. Britain heard it after 1914. The pound never recovered. The U.S. heard it after 1979 from OPEC. Dollar dominance slipped, gold surged, and diversification became normal. And in 2022, after $300 billion in Russian reserves were frozen and banks were cut off from SWIFT, the entire non-Western world reached the same conclusion at the same time. China pushed harder for a parallel financial world. BRICS expanded and began designing a gold-linked trade unit. Saudi Arabia questioned the future of the petrodollar deal. India settled more trade in rupees. Russia rewired its entire economy away from Western pipes. Gold moved from west to east at a scale not seen in decades, and countries that once felt safe, Indonesia, Brazil, South Africa, even U.S. allies, began hedging. That's how a monetary era ends, not by crashing, by being replaced, slowly, then suddenly. Because once alternatives exist, CIPS, SPFS, UPI, currency swaps, gold settlement, the monopoly is broken. And when the monopoly is broken, the power that comes from it fades. The US thought it was punishing Russia, but the real consequence was different. The world realized the dollar system is no longer neutral. It is controllable. It is political, and no sovereign nation wants its economic life in someone else's hands. So they diversified, they hedged, they shifted. And that shift is irreversible. The dollar will remain important, but it will no longer be the center of everything. The world is moving toward a multipolar monetary system, a world with multiple payment rails, multiple reserve assets, and no single dominant currency. A world where gold plays a bigger role, where regional currencies settle regional trade, where SWIFT is just one network among many. The countdown didn't start in Moscow. It started in Washington, the moment the financial weapon was used at full scale. And history shows exactly how this story ends. Every time a superpower turns its financial system into a weapon, it accelerates its own decline. The pattern never changed in the last 110 years. And it isn't going to change now.